All right, today we're going to talk about whether or not you can create tables with merged cells in Alteryx. And the short answer to that is yes, but it kind of depends on what you want to do exactly. And so if you look at the screen and you consider this data table as a starting point or a reference point, if you will, if you want to do something like a row merge, and if the request is very vanilla, that is, you only have one field that you want to merge on, one categorical value, then nine times out of 10, it's very easy. It's the easiest out of the three to do. All right. If you're doing something a little bit more complicated like a column merge, it really depends. It's not hard, but it's not easy. And the reason I say this is because whether or not you can merge a column header nicely and have it format nicely, that's really the key criteria here. Building something in the workflow for this particular ask is one thing, but actually having it format correctly when you export it is another. Part of what makes this keeps the formatting in line is having um, even headers. All right. So in this case, when you look at our data table, although we have six fields, effectively we have only five. And so when you go and try to merge the fields that are similar, in this case, D and E falls under the region of EMEA, and columns G and H fall under AMER. You really have five, okay? And because there's five, and because there's a 2, 1, 2, that is two cells merged into one, or that is two cells, one cell, and then two cells. Because of that, formatting can get actually very tricky and might skew itself when you do ultimately decide to output a file. And so it's cases like this where you have a bunch of um, uneven merges that tend to make it difficult. All right, it's not impossible, but it does get kind of messy, and especially so if you start to nest a lot of things. Okay, so column merge, if you're doing something like that, it's kind of in the middle in terms of difficulty. So yeah. Lastly is the I think the more typical case, which is you have a combination of both. You want to merge column headers as well as merge certain row headers, if you will, categorical values. Okay. And so in this case in front of you, I have a bunch of just random countries just posted under the regions, but maybe a more practical example would be probably financial data. You might want to be grouping it by the year and the quarter on the row side. And on the column side, you probably want to group it by, let's just say, the department, the business unit, what have you. Okay. So if that is the case and you want to do that for presenting to make it a little more readable, you're going to be running into a big hurdle here. And that largest hurdle is the formatting. You may be able to get pretty close to there through the workflow itself, but gosh, when you try to export it, that's when you run into the biggest heartache, especially if you spend all that time um, making the workflow format correctly, because typically, at the export stage, you're done, right? But because of the tools that we're using to get there, it actually is a bigger issue than usual in the Alteryx workflow, right? And so with that, let me get to a few workflows to example this. All right, so I'm going to show you how to merge rows now. Um, and so as a quick reminder, merge rows is along the vertical axis. So, if you look at the original data, we have a handful of countries that fall under group 2 and then a handful of countries that fall under group 1. And we want to sort of call that out a little bit more aesthetically so that all those that fall under group 2, rather than have 2 appear multiple times, appears one time, okay, in this nice little box and show up as such in an Excel file that you can hand off to your leaders or your stakeholders, okay? So in order to do that, first off, we need to start off with the data. I simply copied all this and I pasted it in Alteryx. I did it in a text input tool that you can get from the in and out ribbon, and I renamed the top countries 1 through 5. Now the reason I did that is because had I left it the same, Alteryx would have recognized that um, there was non-unique headers being used and would have renamed it anyways. So I was just kind of beating it to the punch. All right. So first thing we do is we load it. All right, that's fine. It's solid. And now we have to do some pre-work. So because I know where I'm going, essentially what you have to tell now, in order to get to this step, what you have to tell Alteryx is you have to have Alteryx kind of recognize what we recognize here with the color coding. You know, in a way, this is one table, or not a way. this is one table, but in a way it's two tables as well. And it's two tables in the sense that everything under group two can be a table, and everything under group one can be a table, as indicated in this highlight, all right? And that's what we're going to do for where we need to be in Alteryx, all right? So in order to do that, we need to take advantage of the reporting ribbon and pull the table and tell it, hey, look, I want you to make a table, but rather than leave everything as is and just kind of transform it into a rendered table, I want you to consider the grouping. So go here, scroll down, click group, and then we unclick group. Why do we unclick group? Well, that is simply by choice, all right? What I mean by that is because I know what I want to do next aesthetically, there's a reason why I don't want to see group. Now, for the sake of clarity, here's why you want to keep group, all right? So actually data goes in here. Here it comes in. That's weird. Why did it not? Oh, I didn't run it. Okay, so the data comes here, and I told you I unselected group. So what is the output? The output is simply what we want. That is the groups of countries in the let's just say a handful of countries in the group that they belong in, 1 and 2, all right? Now, what would happen if you were to keep group clicked? All it would do would be it would explicitly show those group values. So if you open it up, there you go, 1, 2, 2 again. Now, two things wrong with this. One is, well, now we're going backwards. We already have these values, okay? We didn't need it. That's one. And two, that's not necessarily the point. The point is we're trying to merge it down to one. So that's the reason why I didn't click group. Now, that said, could you use this approach to still get to where you need? Yes. What I mean by that is really what we want here is we want these bottom twos removed, these two values removed, right? So either you can go with my original way, or actually what you can do is you can write in a column rule to say that, hey, for every single table, anything but the first row populate the group category value, okay? And to do that, you just go here and you go to create column rules and you enter in the logic here so that it does what you want. But I'm not going to do that for the sake of time, and all I'm going to do is just say like that's the reason, that is one possible way, but because I'm doing another way, I'm not going to write in that logic, and that's why I deselect it, okay? So I'm going to deselect it again, I'm going to run it again so that we're back to where we need to be, this spot. Now, one other thing to notice is because this is now two explicit tables, Alteryx has correctly duplicated the headers so that everything is still very clear. Unfortunately for us, we don't need these headers. We actually, we just need the tables. Like, in a way, we don't need to see the tables so explicitly called out. So it's really for the art of what we're trying to do at the end. So because of that reason, we actually don't need the headers, okay? If it's not making sense, I'll just try to push on forward so that hopefully when you get the end, you kind of get it more. You don't need the header, so we actually want to remove it again so that we just have the table, right? Like so, okay? And don't worry about it being misaligned. That'll fix itself later on, all right? So now that we have this, what we need is we actually need to do an explicit call out. Like if we want this groups 1 and 2, we actually need to call it out again. Right now it shows 1 and 2, but that's not really an explicit field for us to use. That's simply the record number, which is kind of like this implicit measure on the side, all right? So what I mean by that is as we build out the workflows, the record is not going to be there. So we need something to be there. And since we have that value, all we have to do is we have to build a nested table to call that value back out again. So bring another table here, tell it, hey, look, coming from this flow, we have two values. We know the grouping information, we know the table information. What do you want me to do? Well, simple, group it again and just show me, all right? So we do that again. And if you look at the, oops, sorry, there's no browse tool. If you look at the browse, now we have it explicitly called out 1 and 2, all right? So all you have to do is remove it first so that you don't show all the 1, 2, 2s and 3, whatever, and then call it back out again, all right? And it'll create this really nice looking table for us. Now, once again, we could have done the other way. We could have had the 2s pop up and just manually erased it, but it just doesn't look as nice. Although ultimately when you export out to Excel, it all kind of looks the same. But if you were to use the composer file, it does make a difference in terms of the aesthetics and the appearance of it all right? So here we are, we have it merged. All we have to do now is export it the way we want, okay? So how do we do that? Pretty simple. You just do a render, all right? and then you render it out as whatever file. In our case, it's going to be an Excel file. Okay, so we do that and we run it, all right? And what do we get? Let's look. We get this file and we get this. So this is our Excel file, okay? And so see here, 1 is accurately 1 row, and then now 2 is accurately 3 row, correctly 3 row, if you will, all right? Now, some of you might say, well, this is not a final product because it's not deliverable. So really what's missing here, it's the headers, okay? So if you want headers, what you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to duplicate the efforts and just basically manually create those headers in. So what I mean by that is, take this here, and what we're gonna do is we're just gonna copy the first row because I really need this value, okay? I'm gonna copy it. Oh, actually, no, here's what I'm gonna do. I need that value somehow. So I'm gonna first copy this so I don't have to manually input it back in. All right. And I don't need any of this. I'm gonna delete the, oh, I didn't, good thing I didn't delete the rows. All right. And then I'm gonna come here and I'm just gonna borrow the information from here. All right. It doesn't matter which row I pick. I'm gonna select the cells with headers because it's really the headers I want. I'm gonna paste it in. All right. I'm gonna delete this row because I don't need that. I'm gonna run it so it loads into Alteryx. Okay. And so these are the headers I'm going to use. Same concept. I'm going to go to table. I'm going to group it by the grouping. I'm going to remove it. In this case, I don't have to do nested one because these are just headers. And I'm just going to stack it. All right. Here, let me add a browse tool so you know what I'm doing. So here, it's all that is just that. All right. And I'm just going to stack it now, one over the other. Now this is important because I want the header above. And this is the thing with rendering tools. Rendering tools are really, not rendering tools, reporting tools. Reporting tools are super finicky and they really care about the location and how things flow in and let that dictate kind of how things look on the page. So because these are headers, I actually want to make sure that this is coming in first, all right? And then this coming in second, all right? I'm going to move this render tool a little bit further down because now that we want headers, it's not quite complete yet, all right? So I do that, and just to make sure, I'm going to say set specific order so that 1 is first, 2 is second, all right? I do that, and then I bring it here, run it, okay? And what do we get here now? And so we have this now. So similar to before, we have it correctly in a sense, but it's still misaligned. So we got to do some work here. Actually, a few things are wrong. We don't have the group header, and it's misaligned, all right? And we got a double header. So let's go back and fix things. So let's go back, go here, and we say don't show the column headings. And actually, we do need the group. And because we know the group is going to be the first, we want to actually move that group header first. So we move it up, 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 and it should be fine. It should flow fine. And now let's look at the file. And there we go. If you zoom in closer, this is now a perfect file for what you need. You have a header for the groups, the countries, and everything is aligned and everything is set. And that is it. And I guess you can clean it up if you want to add some bars, but really you shouldn't because that kind of, once again, defeats the purpose of sending it through Alteryx. This is how you would merge rows. All right. Now, with this said, let me say that really the practical challenge here now is you can do it, but on scale it's tough because Alteryx still is very limited in how it can format the Excel files. For one, this has to come out as a 2007 Excel file, and two, if you notice here, like, why is this gray? Why isn't this gray or this or that? I mean, I know why these are gray. It's because you have two separate tables and the table rules dictate it. But my point is saying that there's a lot of manual work that goes into coloring all this, and it's not guaranteed that it's going to necessarily translate over. So just be careful. Like rows is the easiest, but still it may not work to your liking the way you'd like. It's very difficult to clean up Alteryx Excel. All right. So that's how you do rows, and then next I'll show you how to do column headers. All right. Next I'm going to teach you how to do a column merge. Column merge is relevant if, say, within your data table, you notice that a handful of your values fall under the same column headers. In this case, if you look at columns D and E, you notice that a lot of these European countries have the same column header. Well, if the intent is to maybe hand this off to someone and make it more readable to your stakeholders, that might be a situation where you might want to entertain the idea of a column merge. So you transform something like this into something like this, and voila, it's slightly more readable. And especially so if your data table is bigger than what you see in front of you right now. All right. So if you do want to do something like this, here's how you do it in Alteryx. Okay. So starting off, I'm going to just copy this. I'm going to paste it into this text input tool. So there's no file. Don't ask me about it. And you see that one to one, that's what we get. All right. So we have EMEA, APAC, AMER, and all the countries. All right. No funny business. So similar to the row approach, what we have to recognize here is if we want to, when we merge things, think of things in terms of tables. So what we have here is actually two tables. It's tempting to think of this as three tables, but within the realm of Alteryx, that would actually just be more work than what you want. So for the sake of how things function, really the two tables to identify here are this bottom table and this top table. And also one other thing to mention, because grouping was really only relevant for the row tutorial, I have removed it from this workflow. All right. So with that said, because I recognize that it's two tables, the body and also a new header, what I'm going to just do with this is I'm just going to prep it for use. So because we have to render to do this, that is why I'm utilizing the tools here. I'm just going to send it into a table. I'm going to remove the column heading, and that's it. I'm going to add a browse tool just to show what I'm doing. All right. So you see here, no funny business, just remove the heading. That's all I'm going to do. Now I need to sit the headers above there. So what I'm going to do is do another text input, and I'm going to reference what I started with. It's EMEA, APAC, AMER, and I'm going to add that in. All right, so EMEA, and I'm going to add an actual value because that's what I'm going to use, APAC and AMER. I'm going to delete this row because it's not relevant. Load it in, it's fine. Okay, we see that right there, and we're going to do the same thing. Now we prep this for use. I don't need the header. That is fine. And now that this works, I'm just going to, and I'm going to add a browse tool here just to show what I have here as well. So here we just have the headers. So now I just need to stack this on top of this. All right. And to do that, we use a union tool. And so one thing to note here, the reporting tab and all its features is really finicky. So order really does matter. So don't indiscriminately just add lines in. Most of the times you can, it really doesn't do much, but for the sake of reporting ribbon that is, be very clear about your orders. So in this case, because we want the header to be first, I'm going to send this in first and then this. I'm going to set the specific order, all right? I'm going to add a browse tool after C, our product. We do that, and it looks fine, okay? So now we need to align it correctly, if you will, all right? So to do that, we're going to use a tool called the layout tool. So we're going to say this, and then rather than each individual record, we do group of records, and then the orientation will be vertical with contents to line up with table columns, all right? So we run this, and what do we get? Voila, we're almost there. So what you're going to notice here is that if you start from left to right, you'll see that the European countries are correctly aligned with EMEA, Asia is correctly aligned with APAC, but then AMER is incorrectly split up between the two. Why is that? The reason is because when you do this cell merging at the column level, Alteryx is just doing indiscriminately of the data below it, literally below it, okay? And part of that is because we split the two things up and we're just stacking on top of each other. So it doesn't really know any better to begin with. All it knows is it's just stacking two things, and we told it to kind of like arrange the cells so that they fit the criteria. What is that criteria? Well, when we tell it to fit line up with table columns, we're saying, hey, take account of the columns. In this case, it's 5, and just do the best even number. So what we have here is Alteryx looks at the 5 columns and says, okay, can I split this all by 2? Or can I split this all by 1? Yes. Can I split this all by 2? Uh, Actually, let me think about this. How do I phrase this? 3. Here's a better way to phrase it. Sorry, I blanked for a second. So it takes what it has up here, and it takes the total amount of columns and it divides it and it rounds up. All right. So here we have 5 columns, but we have 3 headers that we need to do. So it divides 5 by 3 to get 1.5 and then rounds up. So that says for every 2, assign it to a header. So so it does that, which is correct. Well, no, which is incorrect. And then it just randomly assigns it to the header evenly spaced. Okay. And the reason why this is not 2 is because we limit it to the max of the column. Had there been another row here, a mirror would have naturally been spread out one more column. So the short of it is when you have uneven columns, this is what you might run into, just this uneven splitting, because we're just brute forcing the 2 on top of each other. What are some workarounds? One workaround is you can go ahead and output this in the composer file and fix it post export, but that just kind of defeats the whole purpose of this thing, of creating a workflow that gives you a ready to use file. The other way is you can just kind of be very tricky with the select tool in the beginning. And what I mean by that is, look, I know that Alteryx assigns its splitting from left to right. All right, so it starts from this end all the way to the right. So 2, 2, and then whatever's left over gets it. All right. So with that said, because I know that China only has 1 column, why not move Amer up 2 and APAC down 1 so that it does capture 2, 1. And that's what we're going to do. So go to the prep ribbon, grab the select tool, and we just put APAC all the way down. All right. And likewise, we want to correct this. So we delete this column. We'll call this APAC, APAC. All right. And then here's the thing. Here's the tricky thing about the reporting ribbon. It memorizes things. So even if you change things up front, it might kind of spaz out. So don't be surprised. All right, so let's run it and let's see what we get. So EMEA is fine. APAC is still stuck there. China, everything's still stuck there. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to disconnect this. Okay. We're going to run it. And let's look at the table. So table's fine. EMEA, AMER, APAC. That looks fine. This one should be fine as well. So let's connect this again. 1 is first, then 2. Let's run it, see what happens. EMEA, AMER, APAC. There we go. And so now this is it. This is kind of our solution here. So so we took advantage of how Alteryx spaces out the headers, and then we made it work in our exact example. Obviously, though, you know, as you're following along, this is not going to work for most tables, and so just be aware, and especially is going to get more complicated if you start doing nested tables, like tables within like fused tables within fused tables, right? But you know, if your thing is relatively simple, this is kind of how you do merged columns. And once again, had these all been even numbers, 2, 2, 2, it would have been a lot easier for you to do all this. So so yeah. And then also, as an aside, you might be looking at this and go, hey, how do I make this a little bit cleaner, a little nicer? If you want this to kind of like center itself, just go to the basic tables and actually, you know what? Maybe it's here. No, I think it's here. I believe you can just align it here. So if you go center, let's see, and let's delete this information. There we go. And that's how you would do it. You'd center it to make it a little bit nicer and yada yada. And then if you render it, temporary Excel document, this is what it would look like. There we go. So this would be how you would do a column merge. All right, so it looks pretty good, pretty straightforward. So yeah. All right, lastly, we're going to go over how to do both a column and row merge on the same table. And like I mentioned before, this type of transformation tends to be the most difficult, and often, more often than not, your output is not usable, or at least it requires heavy editing. And if you're going to go and heavily edit it after sending it through Alteryx for purely the aesthetic automation, then you're kind of just defeating the purpose of using it in the first place, all right? So let's go look at the workflow. The workflow is already built out. If you watch the previous 2 sections, you'll see how to build them out individually. But because it's just a combination of rows and columns, you're just taking those 2 pieces and putting them together, all right?
So first off, let's look at the data input. The top part is the first step I took. What I did was I took the data and I decided to first dictate to Alteryx the row columns that I wanted to merge. So in this case, group 1 and 2, right? Because of some of the logic that I mentioned prior, I move APAC all the way to the bottom, whereas when it first comes in, it's kind of squished in the middle, all right? So by moving it here, everything should align appropriately. I create the table and make sure to config the table to group by group. I uncheck group because I don't want all the values to appear per row. And I also remove the column headings because I will be putting my own headings on this table. All right. Now, one thing to remember is that when I unclick this, because of design reasons, I need to actually bring the group back in together. All right. So what that requires me to do is build another table here. So let me put out a browse tool here so it's a little bit more clear. So when I do this first set of configs, in case you're just dropping by this section, it removes the groups, but I want them actually to be back. And the really only reason I remove them is because aesthetically it looks funny. Not that it's not a way to go forward, but personally I just choose not to. And so to get that value back, get the group values back, I just nest it again in another table. So I do this here, and I just indicate, hey, actually, the group, show the group for me. When I do that, you see here it shows the group that they're part of 1 and 2, all right? Now that I have the two rows merged already, now we just need the headers, the columns above. And for that, we need to create new headers. So in this case, we only have 3 groups and then the group. We have 3 groups, but we need a header for a group, right? And so in this case, I gave them some generic header, but then the values are the ones I want, all right? So I set up the table and I group it by group because really I don't care about this, I just want this. And also I want to make sure that it keeps this value. So I group it by group, and then I keep it there because I do want to see it, because I know it's just going to be one row. And then likewise, I don't show the column heading because I don't care. And so when I set that up, all I do is I just now stack it. So to stack it, I just use a union tool, and I stack the 2 tables that I've prepped in XML on top of each other. So how I do that is I just do it by position, although that's not as important. You can probably do it by name and it still works. But what I do is I make sure the order is in the way I want it, which is 1 and 2. Now, small nuance here. Once again, this is a bit of repetition. Logically you might think, yeah, it's always gonna be 1 and 2, but not quite. Sometimes people indiscriminately just kind of run the lines in. This one, you have to really make sure that this bottom one, the headers specifically, is the one that's going in first to dictate kind of the output, and then number 2, all right? So, or alternatively, if this is 2, then just switch up the order, all right? And by clicking on this set a specific order, it makes sure that this will always be this way in case Alteryx hiccups for whatever reason, okay? And so when you union the 2, this is what you should get. You should get all 3 tables stacked on top of each other. So we're getting kind of close here. We can see that group is above group, EMEA is above, I think, some of the European countries, AMER is above, hopefully the US countries, and then lastly, APAC is above Japan, Taiwan, right? So to get this group and fit really nicely, we of course have to use the layout tool from the reporting ribbon. All right, right now it doesn't show here because I just loaded my instance, but if you wanted to bring it up, you just go here, here, and voila, here's all your tools. Okay, so you bring in the layout tool, you tell it to group each group of records, all right, and then we tell it specifically to do a vertical merge, all right? By default it's horizontal, but we want it to not only do vertical, but also line up everything so that this here gets squared up real nice and good, all right? So we do that, and then what is our outcome? We get this, all right? So far, so good? No. So if you look at the rows, we retain that characteristic, which is good, but if you look at the columns, now everything is all screwed up, okay? Not going to get back into it. You can watch the prior section before this about columns, but essentially the way that Alteryx splits up the columns per header is screwing up with our output. If you notice here, APAC gets correctly the last column, but AMER incorrectly only captures the first group of America countries. It doesn't capture this one. And then EMEA gets now incorrectly captures this one as well as partial of the European countries, and then group inaccurately captures both, because once again, that's just the way Alteryx stacks, or that's how Alteryx splits the columns. It goes from left to right and it looks at the columns you have and the headers you have, and it kind of divides it and tries to parse it out that way. Specifically here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns that it tries to divide between 4. So it divides by 4 and it sees it's 1.5, rounds up to 2, and it starts to partition 2 to the first thing on the left, to the next one, and then realizes, okay, I've only got 2 left, I can't do that 2, 2, so I got to split it 1, 1 to a marinade pack. And because of this dumb, indiscriminate way of splitting the headers, it actually kind of screws up what we want to do. Now the question here is, well, can we do anything post? You can play around perhaps with some logic here to get everything truly aligned, but the juice is not quite worth the squeeze, because let's just say you get this perfect. Here's the problem with the next step. Okay, so assume that you get this correct. Now you got to output it. You have 2 options here. Truly, you can either make it a composer file. Let's go here. All right, in which case, if you get it right prior, that is the end for you. But pragmatically, a composer file really is not that useful for most people. A composer file, really its value is for someone else with Alteryx, perhaps to preview, or someone or a business that's using Alteryx server. But even then, at the end of the day, chances are they're going to want to export this information. When they export it, it has to be in one of the following 4 formats for the general business. It's got to be Word, or Alteryx offers the following: Word, PDF, Excel, and perhaps there's one more. It might be 3 actually. The 4th one is the composer file itself. And when they ultimately move on beyond the composer file, here's where it becomes problematic, because if you look at everything else, in this case we're looking at the Excel. If the composer file is bad, the Excel file is even worse. All right, so here we have all the problems of the composer file and then new ones. Okay, so here's a few things. We already identified that the columns are all skewed because of the way Alteryx distributes them. So 1, they're not correctly over the countries that they're supposed to. 2, now we have a shifting. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and because this 2 is blank in the composer file, when it gets converted to Excel, Excel automatically auto-formats and formats this into blank cells. And when it does so, it shoves, in order to try to retain kind of the characteristics of this, that is to fit everything into the same square of tables, if you will, it shifts all the countries left 1 unit to fill in that blank space. And then now that it has 1 blank unit, to compensate for that, now it unifies the cells that just lost its country. So now Taiwan and Japan fill 2 cells rather than 1, all because Excel automatically shifted everything over, and then Alteryx tried to make it square. All right. So the takeaway here is you have all sorts of things going against you when you're trying to do a column and row merge, not just at the workflow level, but also at the formatting level. So even if you get this part right, you're kind of stuck here. And that is why, at the end of the day, if you're trying to do a column and row merge, you have a lot of things going against you. So effectively, when you go back to the question of can Alteryx be used to create tables with merged cells? Technically, yes, but pragmatically, I'll pause there. Pragmatically, it mostly works for row merges. It works okay for column merges, and more often than not, it just does not work for column and row merge. Okay, so that is the takeaway there. Works for row merges, okay for column merges, not good at all for column and row merges in general. Okay, and that is where I will stop off. So I hope this has helped you with creating tables with merge cells.